Now, with that, this leaves one last item on our agenda, and I'd like to have a real conversation with you about that. You know, when I talked to staff about how much time to allot for the meeting, we actually scheduled it to go until 3 o'clock. And we did that because we wanted to ensure that we had ample time to have the kind of conversations that I felt that we needed to have at this meeting. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to go until 3 o'clock, and I respect that. But I do want to get some sense from you about how you'd like to proceed moving forward. If you recall, we've had conversations about the fact that we want to spend more time with strategic conversation and less time dealing with mundane issues that we've kind of have to deal with. As a part of that, we're trying out this new consent agenda to make a better use of your time. We kind of find ourselves, based upon the fact we had so many visitors today, that it's later in the afternoon, we're kind of winding down, and we still have a very important issue to address. So what I'm asking if you all would do is if you would at least make a commitment to be here another hour to an hour and 15 minutes. And I'm looking to my chair of my strategic plan to at least if we can do that. And certainly, I would say if we could do more, but if you can impose or make an agreement to stick with us for that much longer, we have a responsibility to deal with the development of a strategic plan. And unfortunately, that's some nitty-gritty work that we as a committee need to, get the information that they want to present that they plan to present today, so that the strategic planning committee can move forward. So I'm asking you all, because you asked for the opportunity for more strategic discussion. Here's our chance to get it started. If you can make that commitment, I promise that I will ensure that next time we have this kind of conversation more in the morning, when I think you're fresher. And I know you've been here since 7 o'clock today, so I mean, believe me, I thank you for that as well. What I'd like to do is just to say that we are not going to always move forward as a full committee, as a full board committee on this issue, but I thought that it was important so that Governor Martin and Dottie can get the right framework for where they should go next, that we weigh in together as a board. Please make this as interactive as possible, but I think you need this basic information first so that we can properly direct Governor Martin and his committee and Governor Root as his vice chair to move forward. So I'm not going to let you vote on that question about can you stay for another hour and 15 minutes. We're just going to go with it, and Governor Martin, if you and Dottie can take it from there.
Thank you very much. And I realize that it has been a long day, and we'll try to compress it, and if we can get out in less time, it would be great. But I first want to thank the chair for giving us the opportunity to lay the framework for the strategic plan. Based upon the discussions we've had this morning, the Speaker in the House and the Senate President talked about the importance of planning. And Governor Root and I have talked with staff, and we've not had a face-to-face meeting. We probably need to have one at some point in time. But he and I both have talked to Dottie about what we feel are the key ingredients in that plan. So what we want to do today is begin to lay the framework for developing the plan. I envision this to be a plan that has a 20 to 25-year focus, maybe the first 5 years as a strategic action plan year, and then 5 years, and then having an annual update to the process. And when you look at strategic planning, it's a very involved process. And depending upon the organization, it could take a couple of years sometimes to develop a program. It is our intent to have this finalized by the end of the year. So as we begin to lay the foundation for this journey we're going to go on, these are some of what I consider the key ingredients that will be a part of the plan before we get into the PowerPoint presentation. We need to understand what the population trends are going to be in the state over that time frame. What regions will be gaining and are losing population? What about the employment? What are going to be the employment trends? And how will that impact the educational system? What would be the key industry focuses that we'll have? Yes, tourism has been the main line for Florida and citrus, but as we move into this two paradigm, what will be the new industries that we'll be going into to diversify our economy? And then more importantly, how are we going to prepare our students so they can be global partners in that process? With the two new medical schools that came online during the last 3 or 4 years, we're seeing the whole medical industry change, Lake Nona, and what's happening in South Florida. So that is having a tremendous impact on our system. The I-4 tech corridor, you have a situation where we have multiple universities that are involved in that collaboration. The commercialization grants that we have been successful over the last several years, and the impact of research and the startup companies that happen as a result of that research. How will that play into the impact of us building a university system that can support that ongoing activity? What's going to be the pipeline of students that are graduating from high school? Yes, we know that we have the state college system and have some impact as well, but looking at all these inputs into the overall process. The plan needs to be realistic. It needs to have the input of everyone on this board. So although we have a strategic planning committee, but Governor Root and I both feel very importantly that we need to have the input of everybody on the board, and through staff and through collaboration, you will have the opportunity to get involved in the process to make sure that we are on the right track. And again, it's going to be a process, collaborative process, getting involved, having discussion and dialogue, and I think we've come a long way, and I'm very pleased with the board in terms of what I see in terms of the board becoming more proactive, more engaging, and to help us in developing this process. So with this, I'm going to ask Dottie to come up and kind of walk us through the first, say, foundation point in terms of laying the groundwork for this collaborative discussion that we'll have. So, Dr. Muneer?
Thank you, Governor Martin. As we begin to update the system strategic plan, it might prove to be really useful to look at the traditional tripartite mission of our state universities, the tripartite mission of teaching, research, and service, really through a 21st century lens. We know that the United States, and Florida specifically, faces economic competition on an unprecedented scale. And we must prepare our graduates, really, President Genschaft, to succeed in the global marketplace and community. And we must individually and collectively have our institutions advance innovation, new technologies, new processes, new products, new ideas, and their local and the state economy. Help Florida employers prosper and grow through knowledge transfer, and make community engagement an integral part of their institutional culture. What we're going to do today is actually, given the time constraints, zero in on a very specific component of this that has to do with educational attainment goals for the state of Florida, and more specifically for the state university system. And we're going to focus even more closely on baccalaureate degrees as a starting place. But I think that this framework we can continue to build out with your input over time. Yesterday, Dr. Bruce Shalhoub from SREB talked to you about some data from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, which reports how the United States is doing relative to educational attainment levels in comparison to other countries. And Bruce mentioned the growing concerns about the United States actually falling in the ranks over the past several years. Here we've selected some countries for comparison just based on baccalaureate degree production. To reemphasize one of the points that was made yesterday, you'll note that the percentage of 25 to 34-year-olds, the darker teal colored bar, barely surpasses the percentage of 45 to 54-year-olds in the United States, whereas in other countries the younger population is actually doing very well and doing better all along. The earnings and employment gaps between individuals with post-secondary credentials and just high school credentials has grown substantially wider in the past decades, indicating that employers really do want workers with college-level skills, and they're really willing to pay extra to get those workers. Not only do individuals in general benefit from increased earnings for higher educational attainment, but local and state economies benefit as well, as can be indicated by the taxes paid by these individuals with greater educational attainment levels. The Center on Education and the Workforce at Georgetown University has been doing some considerable research in this area recently, and they indicate that by 2018, about 2/3 of all employees will have some college education or better. About 33% will have a bachelor's degree or higher. I want to kind of lock in that 33% in your mind, because 33 is going to come up on several occasions. The expectation remains that the best jobs, the fastest growing firms, whether in the biosciences, technology, manufacturing, trade, or entertainment, will gravitate to the communities, regions, and states with a highly qualified workforce. So today we want to talk more specifically about baccalaureate attainment goals. What percentage of Florida's working age population should have the baccalaureate or higher? And how does that translate into how many degrees we need to be awarding in the state, and more specifically within the state university system? We've already talked about a couple of these items, and it's been mentioned on several occasions throughout the day that because the state university system is not the only sector awarding baccalaureates in Florida, it's going to be very important to coordinate our efforts with the other delivery systems via the Higher Education Coordinating Council. And we'll need to look at other parts of the educational pipeline and more fully understand their impact on demand for access, as well as opportunities for improved educational attainment. And all of this leads back to the needed discussions regarding capacity and structure the state university will have to be able to meet these needs. Governor Martin mentioned that this would be an iterative process, so to help us focus today, what I'd like to do is actually bookmark, if you will, a couple of items as assumptions, knowing that we're going to return to these with greater detail in future discussions, acknowledging their importance, but not focusing on them as specifically today, but more focusing on just baccalaureates in general. We know that the quality of those baccalaureates cannot be ignored. We understand that there will be a need to have discussions about baccalaureates in which disciplines. We also acknowledge that there are going to be significant demographic changes in the student population that are going to need to be addressed in the coming years, and we will continue to assume that a highly educated workforce will attract high-skilled, high-wage jobs to the state and help position Florida to excel in an increasingly competitive, knowledge-based economy. So, where do we stand as a state? If you'll draw your attention to the red bar, in 2008, approximately 26.6% of our 25 to 64-year-old working age population in Florida had the baccalaureate or higher. The yellow bar indicates the national average at 29.8%. But we have taken this one step further. What we did was we overlaid the 10 states with the top gross domestic product per capita. Although there are many considerations about the differences of these states, I think that the pattern there is pretty obvious, with so many of them clustering at the top relative to educational attainment levels. By the way, the average among those 10 is 33.9. Again, that 33%, or a third, being a good goal to keep in front of us at all times. But how does this translate from educational attainment levels in the working age population to actually the degrees that we're awarding in any given year? This is the information that this board focused on when you developed your first iteration of the strategic plan. The original goal was to reach the national average by 2012-13. The problem is, of course, that the average keeps moving. So in 2008-9, Florida ranked 41st with 12.3 per thousand in the 18 to 44-year-old range. And the average is currently estimated to move up to 16 by 1920. But again, because so many states are focusing on improving their educational attainment levels, that's going to be the goal that we're going to have to chase. But those data were for all of the baccalaureates awarded in the state of Florida. I think it's important for us to take into consideration what percentage of those are actually being awarded by the state university system. Pretty consistently, the SUS has been awarding about 2/3. For 08-09, it was 64%. Throughout this presentation, you'll begin to note some of the policy levers that are before us. Some of the policy discussions are going to have to take place at the state level and within the system. But currently it's 64. For instance, Florida College System in 08-09 was only producing or awarding 1% of the baccalaureates that were awarded. We've been working with our colleagues in the Florida College System, and according to their very preliminary rough estimations, based on what they know now, this could grow to, that's about 1,000, a little over 1,000 from 08-09. That could possibly grow to about 10,000 by 2019-20, but the growth rate is expected to drop below 10%. So, if we kept that national goal, national average in mind, what it would mean that we would need to do to increase between now and 2019-20 is a 31% increase, or up to 69,800 baccalaureates awarded by the SUS annually. The good news is we're already on target to surpass that. If we maintain the same rate of growth that we've got going right now over the past 9 or 10 years, 37% increase, will hit 73,000 plus. I think you're probably well aware of the fact that in response to this growing concern about the United States standing in comparison to other countries, a lot of different groups have stepped up, set goals, provided support for us to increase the educational attainment levels throughout the country. Here are just a few of them. Obviously, the Obama administration has established a very high-level goal. It's also been supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Lumina. Florida has joined on to the Complete College America Alliance. The Hispanic Scholarship Fund has set parallel goals relative to having at least one person in every Hispanic household with a degree. But from the broadest perspective, although the metrics vary a little bit and the timelines vary a little bit, the bottom line is we need more. And this can translate using one set of metrics and calculation, a 50% increase needed by 2020, which it talks about 8 million new young adults with the associate or baccalaureate above and beyond what are being awarded today. And again, as recently as day before yesterday, announcement came out from the US DOE that funds are being made to help incentivize states who are help moving this agenda forward. So there's some possibilities out there for us to take advantage of. So fortunately, Patrick Kelly, who works with the National Center for Higher Educational Management Systems, has done a study to determine how much each state should contribute to the goal of producing 8 million additional associates and baccalaureate degrees by 2020, adjusting for current levels of educational attainment and population by state. Bottom line is that he determined that Florida needed an average annual percentage increase in degree production between 2007-08 and 2019-20 of 4.8%. If one assumes that this goal will be applied equally to associate and baccalaureate degrees, and that the SUS maintains its 64% of the share of baccalaureates awarded, that would mean a 64% increase in baccalaureate degree production needed by 2019-20. So this raises a question as to whether or not we have enough students in the pipeline to be able to accommodate these goals. Under Commissioner Smith's leadership, Florida has continued to work on reforming pre-K-12 education to ensure that more students persist and graduate from high school ready to succeed in higher education and careers. For instance, graduation requirements will include increasingly rigorous course and performance expectations. As a recipient of one of the Race to the Top federal grants, Florida has established specific goals to substantially increase the number of high school students who are staying in school, graduating, continuing on into college, and succeeding in their pursuit of college credit. Actually doubling the percent earning college credit is the goal by 2019. So we've worked with the Commissioner's staff to try to model this out. Actually, the expectations just based on population is that there will be a leveling out of students who graduate from the public high schools with a standard high school diploma. But because of the Race to the Top goals of the extra work that's done, you can look at the red increase for expectations. These goals have only been established out to 2014-15, so we've just assumed a leveling out at that point in the process. So what happens to these students who get standard high school diplomas? I do want to emphasize that this particular slide does focus in on those with that particular type of diploma. As you can see, 68% of the students who enroll in post-secondary education in Florida the fall immediately following high school graduation, of those, approximately 61% in the Florida public colleges and 34% enroll in the state university system, again, immediately the following fall. Let me kind of orient you to this type of slide. Obviously, we're going to be able to go back to these in later iterations, dig down into the numbers. But in addition to the public high school students, we also bring in FTI students from private high schools, homeschool students, and from out of states. And that's what the left-hand graph indicates. But then when you get to the series of other bars, for any group of FTICs, just kind of watch the green. That's the progression trajectory for our FTIC students, with 67% obtaining the baccalaureate by year 8. Again, this begins to point out policy levers that we can come back to. The gray portion at the top of each of those bars are the students that are leaving the system prior to graduation. So we then turn to work with the personnel in the Florida college system, the Division of Florida Colleges. They too have established goals relative to the awarding of AA degrees as part of their engagement with the Complete College America. Florida college system has established goals which includes an increase in the number of AA award to above 85,000 by 2019-2020. So again, where do these students go once they get the AA? Based on an OPAGA report study that's been done, 59% of the students who get the AA go ahead and move on into our state university system. Again, a place for improvement as we look for ways to improve our attainment rates. Again, you can follow the green to see how those students progress over time, showing that approximately 77% obtained the baccalaureate by the 8th year. The third group of students in our undergraduate population we refer to as other transfers. Some of them do come from the Florida college system, but they transfer without having fully obtained the AA before transfer. Then we have transfers from other institutions and transfers actually from within our system. Again, the green showing you how those students progress. More policy levers begin to pop up. Questions relative to what's going to serve the students and the state best, what's going to be the most economically sound approach. Earlier, Governor Tripp made a very strong statement about maintaining the 2+2. The question is, are there advantages and disadvantages of encouraging students to complete the AA prior to transfer? And this is just a summary chart that shows all three of those groups together, indicating that about 69% of any newly enrolled class actually finishes a degree by year 8. So, based on these pipeline projections and the goals established by the pre-K-12 sector and the Florida college system, Once again, assuming that the state university system would maintain 64% of the shares of the baccalaureate degrees awarded, and based on current projection trends, this would mean that we would have a 50% increase in the baccalaureates awarded by 1920, or 80,300. But you'll see I've actually presented 4 different scenarios to you, ranging from 69,800 by 2019-20 up to 87,400, from reaching the national average, staying on the same current trajectory, responding to the educational pipeline, or if we actually do the stretch goal and do our part to contribute to the national goal that's been articulated. But the question is even if we are on a current trajectory, or if the K-12 sector and the Florida college system are successful in their endeavors, if we don't do something else to improve graduation rates and to solicit other students, we still won't get to the national goal. So this starts bringing into consideration some strategies for actually being able to change it relative to really focusing on improved graduation rates, possibly the role of e-learning to be able to reach out to additional students, or, as Governor Duncan would like to make sure that I point out, we have tens of thousands of adults in the state of Florida. Well, let me put it this way. We have tens of thousands of adults who have left our system with innumerable credits earned, but without having actually completed the requirements for a degree. This is a population that if we invest in adult training, it's going to benefit businesses in terms of improved employee performance and productivity, increased employee retention rates, reduced administrative time costs, and there's a great effort throughout the country to begin to target these students, particularly those with 60-hour credit hours and more. Florida college system is already targeting those with 30 to 60 as a consideration of being able to bring them back into the system to complete the baccalaureate. Governor Duncan, at this point in time, we are now doing a follow-up to see of these students, how many of them are actually still in the state and working in the state.
We're also going to have a little more of a breakdown on maybe where they came from and what they were studying and kind of pulling together a little better plan.
So this really brings us to the question of, we've been talking in terms of outputs and degree production, but Governor Beard, I know that you were more interested in, so what does this mean relative to capacity issues and enrollment? So what we've done is we've taken the models and we've actually projected out what this would mean given the current enrollment to graduation ratios, what it might mean as far as the enrollment capacity we would need first in 2019-2020, which ranges between 300,000 and 400,000 for undergraduate level only. Now, in response to the fact that we've all been at it for a very long time today, I'm going to jump ahead to try to be a little more responsive to the longer term component. Of course, the further we go out, the squishier it gets relative to the numbers, and we haven't really even tackled graduate and professional education yet. But if we assume that the state university system continues to award approximately 2/3 of the baccalaureates, and that the graduate degrees continue to increase at the same rate for this particular first analysis, this first run on this, and we can circle back to that and refine the models for graduate education later. And the enrollment to degree patterns remain relatively the same, or improve incrementally if we're going for the higher stretch goal, and that the K-12 sector and the Florida college system meet their goals, then the general, very general, first preliminary projections based on these initial models mean that we would be awarding somewhere between 80,000 and 100,000 baccalaureate degrees annually in the state university system by 24-25. Fall undergraduate enrollment would range between 380,000 and 480,000 by 24-25. If we stay on current trajectories for masters, it would be about 25,000 degrees. Doctorate and professional would be about 7,000 annually. And the graduate enrollment, again, consider it not a lot of modeling on this, would just carry the trajectory forward between 125,000 and 170,000. We do have additional non-degree seeking students in the mix. I have not calculated in this. We're talking about a needed fall capacity of between 500,000 and 650,000. At the back of your slides, I've actually included the analysis for how we got to those numbers. But the bottom line is 24, 25, based on this initial run of modeling, between 500,000 and 650,000 enrollment, headcount enrollment. Governor Martin?
Thank you for laying that groundwork. At this point, what we'd like to do is I'm going to go over some decision points and kind of give you a little idea in terms of where we're going to be going as we move this journey along. At some point, I'm going to call on Governor Rood to see if he has any comments he would like to add to the process as well. But what's going to be the number of baccalaureate degrees that we should be awarding annually? What is going to be the contribution to the whole baccalaureate degree goal program? The number of master and doctoral degrees offered, and how best should we structure the state university system to achieve these goals? Moving from a tourism-based economy to a high growth and looking at the overall demands for higher tech, how are we going to prepare our students in order to be more effective in operating in a global marketplace? And then what policies are in place to encourage students to complete their degree? And one of the things that I've been very interested in since I've served on the board is that at least at one point, most of us were getting out of school within 4 years. Now it seems that trend is increasing to 5, in some cases 6 years. And what impact does that also have on the system as well? But these are some of the decision points that I think that we, as we start to develop this particular strategic plan, that we need to start to address. So at this point, I'm going to stop and ask, are there any questions? Governor Husseini.
I thought we were going more towards 4 years or less, because we're asking our students to go to the summer, take summer courses and maximizing the use of our facilities and things like this. Wouldn't that help us, to graduate the kids and send them out of the school faster and sooner versus going into 5 and 6 years? I understand, what has been happening in the past. Isn't it that what we're trying now to, to bring down the length of the graduation?
Yes, I'm going to ask the Chancellor to kind of weigh in on this, but from my perspective, yes, although the trend has been 5 and 6 years, but I would think it should be a goal for us to try to compress that so that they are getting out in at least 4. Correct, Chancellor?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I think both are correct. Clearly, we need to develop a strategic plan for what this thing's going to look like for the next 20 years. But at the same time recognize trends such as Governor Martin mentioned and see what sorts of institutional changes we can make to begin to reverse those trends to the greatest degree possible. Clearly there's a major cultural shift in terms of who is attending higher education today versus who attended in the last generation. I'm not sure you're going to be entirely able to overcome some of those cultural changes and therefore ever get back totally to a time where people go for 4 years. But having said that, what we need to be looking at in our strategic plan is not only how we're organized with numbers of universities, what programs we offer, but also how we are providing that education. Our e-learning workshop yesterday was a very good indication of how we can not only close learning gaps, but also about how we might be able to do a better job with compressing learning time by utilizing online learning and e-learning. So I think you are both accurate. We've got to try to resolve what we look like for the next 20, but within that, how are we going to always be on the search for how we could become more efficient in terms of getting students through as quickly as possible? The bottom line is the faster they get through, the faster they can become a part of the workforce. which is what the vast majority of them want to do. So whether it's a student who can dedicate 4 straight years to it or less, if possible, or a student because of family circumstances or economics is going to take longer, putting in place systems to guarantee that as quickly as we can get them through, we do.
Can I just continue with that, Chancellor? This is really interesting. I have been looking at this. Could it be by mixing of on-campus education and e-learning, mixing them together? Is there a possibility that the 4 years become 3 years? Like the European system right now, in 2 years you graduate from university. I mean, it's 3 years of university. And if that happens, would that give additional, just hypothetical, 25% more capacity to the universities for additional students?
Yeah, we are talking hypothetically, and I don't know about percentages, because trying to take 120 hours and do it in 3 years becomes a considerable challenge. Having said that, some may be able to do that if it's organized appropriately. So without the 25%, if you'll indulge me that, the idea is to try to look at a system for the next 20 years that will maximize space utilization, that will maximize e-learning, that will maximize efficiency of curriculum, to try to see what we can do to make sure that it's efficient as possible. I don't think we're going to know until we really get into this what the potential impact might be, Governor, in terms of where we go with it and what the possibilities are. But it's exciting. I will also say, Mr. Chairman, if you'll indulge me another minute, all of this not only has implications for what this system needs to look like, and not just ours, but what the Florida college system is going to look like, et cetera, but it has huge implications for all those things we deal with on an annual basis as well. What our enrollments are, what programs we offer in institutions and across systems, how we fund our systems, all of those things become very important components of this longer-term look at our system and providing access and opportunity through it. So everything that we talk about all the time becomes really important pieces of a much larger puzzle that we're going to have to look at in this process. You can't leave any of it out, because if you do, it weakens the whole. And I think a lot of the work that we've done over the last couple of years tees us up pretty well to be able to continue those conversations as it lays up against this major backdrop of the next 20 years or so.
Okay, Governor Perez, and then Commissioner Smith, and then Mr. Colson. Perez?
2 questions, Mr. Chairman, and both of them, because I know we're just starting this process, I just want to kind of punt them out there for thought purposes. First, when we started, you said this was probably a 20 to 25-year goal plan, and from Dottie's presentation, which I thought was very useful, thank you, Dottie, it seemed as though we were striving for the national average, and I don't want to spend 2 years planning to be average for the next 20. And I'm just wondering what it would take if we looked at this number and said we want to be top quartile, and what metrics that would require, because we're better than that. And if we're going to do a plan, I don't want a plan that chases average. Thought number one. And number two, and then you can please respond, Mr. Chairman, is I know we're looking at degree production, and I know those are important metrics, but I want to make sure, and I'm sure there's a presentation out there with regard to a quality metric as well, because I know the old adage, what is measured is achieved, is real in these scenarios, and if we got to get to those degrees, we can get to those degrees, but I want to make sure, at least on the SUS side of the coin, we've got a quality metric in place as we continue along this process. And I'd like, if we can have a discussion at some point on what those quality metrics are, in addition to the production metrics, I think that will be helpful.
Certainly, very valid point, and the slides were not saying that that's where we're going to target being average. Yes, we want to make sure that we're better than average, considerably better than average, but that was just a benchmark to start the discussion.
I just wonder if we move the benchmark up, what that would do to the math and the equations that we're looking at.
Certainly, not a problem. Commissioner Smith?
Yeah, just some of the connection between the K-12, particularly high school, what's going on in our high schools right now with the new high school accountability program that emphasizes in the school grading process students that are in college preparatory programs, whether it's advanced placement, international baccalaureate, or dual enrollment, is radically transforming the numbers coming out of our high schools, and it will impact, I believe, in a positive way, the state college going rate and the four-year going rate, and should expedite the speed that a student could get out of a four-year or get out of a two-year program. And we're beginning to see that. To give you an example, and these numbers are like on they're jumping. This has just been the first year of implementation of the high school program, but we have an increase in the numbers of kids that scored 3 or above on AP exams by 15,000 students this last year alone. We increased the number of students that earned at least one dual enrollment credit by 4,000 students this last year alone. And for the dual enrollment, it's in the neighborhood of 8,000 more students earning dual enrollment credit in high school. And prior years it was flatlined. So these are pretty significant jumps in what I call blurring the boundary between high school and post-secondary studies, bringing more college level, state college level coursework down. The numbers of students that are graduating from high school with a two-year degree, with an AA degree also, is going, it's still a small number, but is going up exponentially. So I do think that, and these are all metrics, again, that have good quality measures to them. So these are strong, academically prepared kids that are going in. So this probably is my biggest concern when I look at the K-12 side, is that the numbers are in fact changing. For African American kids, this last year we've moved up the graduation. What we define as a graduate in high school, we used to call a GED, a high school graduate in Florida 2 years ago. Now it doesn't count. And while we eliminated the GED as part of the calculation, we had a 3.5% increase for African American graduates in the state, a 3.2% increase last year in Hispanic Latinos. So when you take these numbers, my biggest fear is that when they march across that high school stage with AP and dual enrollment credits, there needs to be some place to go. Where we see them going in large numbers is to our state college system. 64% of our kids after graduation, if they go into post-secondary, go to state college. And the 2+2 is working well currently, but that's the first place. Our demographics in K-12, we're a minority state. We're close to 50% free or reduced lunch eligible children of poverty. These kids don't have the ability to scoot off to other cities and so forth and rent space and so forth. They're living at home. They probably have a part-time job. So their college-going tendencies are a little bit unique. But I think all these are factors when you look at the market. Who is the customer? If we're going to achieve those kind of numbers and increase baccalaureate production, what does that mean for our major institutions in terms of their racial and economic demographics? To drive those, I think, are all part of the calculations. But I guarantee you, they're coming at you. Our ability to receive them and receive them successfully is going to be the question.
Okay, Governor Colson.
Yes, one of the things that I found interesting about the numbers, and maybe Dottie, it seems to me that the 64% number is probably a number that's too high. If we're really going to have a state college system that's functional, which is something that, if you recall the Pappas report, they wanted something like, the way we got there was really weird. But now that we have a state college system, if it is going to be developed, and I think there's probably a role for that, it just needs to be managed. Then I don't know what that does to the 64% number. Does it take it from 64% to 55% or 50%? And frankly, that what drives that maybe also should be what our universities want. I mean, I could see where we have some universities that want to be 30,000 students, some 50, and some 75,000 students, all in different communities, all for different reasons, and we ought to probably be able to accommodate that. But so I think that's that number is really deserves to be examined, and what should that, is that a real number, or should it be 50%, and we got to figure out the best way to play with that number and work within it. And that's going to, I think, require figuring out what our state universities want in terms of how they see their future in the next 10 or 20 years.
Very good. And
Governor Frost.
I feel that that number up there is going to depend upon how over the next 3 to 5 years you position the state college system and its philosophy and the propaganda you use for it. There's nothing wrong with going to 2 years and graduating after 4 years in a state college system. In Miami, we have Miami-Dade. It produces incredible young people after 4 years, and then they go on to a university, and they are the leaders in our city today. So I think it's going to, that number maybe, Dottie, is not totally accurate in 5 years or 10 years down the road. What's going to happen is how you actually, or how what we decide, we're going to help the state college system develop the propaganda, if you want to use that word, or the marketing, that it's okay to go to college for 4 years at a community college, a state college. There's nothing wrong with it. It could be a great liberal arts experience, and then go to graduate school on a university level, and then we begin to raise the standards and acceptance of students. So we're not building more buildings, and we're not doing all of this, and we have a more select, quote, population. Not with those numbers. Maybe only have 40% going to our university system. I'm not poo-pooing those who want to go to 50, 60,000, but let's face it, our little new college over there, it's a great experience to go 4 years to a great small college, university, whatever we want to call it. So I think it behooves us as a system to help the college system give that right image, not that it's just you go there for 2 years and then you get out and you go to the regular university.
okay, Governor Duncan, Parker, Tripp, then Beard.
Okay, and then Beard, then.
Governor Duncan.
A couple things. One, obviously, I do think that how we build in the online component of this is going to be a big part of it. And while it was a lot of information yesterday, honestly, there's still a lot more to that, and the models of doing that. And again, all of our institutions are tackling that a little differently. But I think that's going to be one component. I also think, though, that we need to think about in this plan how we effectively measure the cost variances of the models. I hear conflicting things. I mean, intuitively you would kind of think bigger is cheaper in the sense that you have better leverage over some infrastructure, but yet I read things that indicate that maybe is a false premise. I'm not sure, but I think as we look at this and understand the infrastructure, not just buildings, but kind of the operational cost models, if there's some way to understand that as we have this discussion, because it may be great to be really big or really small, but I mean it may be that middle-sized is where the sweet spot is for cost effectiveness, and at least how do we get some understanding of that in this dialogue, I think would be helpful, because it's not just about demand. I mean, I think we heard recurringly here this morning that we've got limited resources, and while we want to think big and we want to think long-term and we want to think out of the box, we also need to not have an exercise that goes on a shelf because it's not doable. So, I think just how we balance that would be something that would be important. And I also, just as Dottie mentioned, have really been working with the staff on this, looking at the numbers of people who have left our system. And let's be clear, those numbers were people not coming just from state colleges, or is people in one of our 11 institutions, and we're talking about 23,000 or so of them who have 90+ credit hours hanging out there. I mean, that's a lot of bodies. If we have a way to go out and capture them and bring them back in and maybe use distance learning and use some of the things that are out there. I mean, we can significantly, I think, increase productivity or at least change the ratio some of the graduates that we're getting out there. And then, I mean, the numbers double when you look at 60 credit hours. So, I mean, we're talking about a lot of things. So I think there's some of those kind of different models or different things. You know, and how can we do that effectively as a system? I'm sure each of the institutions have different strategies where they're out marketing to people, but is there a way to do that where we can do it more effectively by working together? There's lots of grants out there on this subject now. You know, what are just some different ways to approach it?
Governor Parker.
I'd just like to make a comment about something that I heard Governor Hussaini question regarding whether or not there's a chance that we can go down from 4 years to 3 years based upon some of the other opportunities that we may have for students to learn. And I guess I'd like to say I'd be concerned if that were our goal. I mean, I think that there's some value in at least trying to stick with the 4-year experience because although a student may be able to take more credit hours because they may be able to take some classes online, I still think that the expectation is that the requirements of the class will be very similar. And that if we are now encouraging students to take 18 hours, let's say, versus a 15-hour load, let's not assume that just because it's a 3-hour class that it's going to be a lot less rigorous just because they're doing it through some distance learning. So I understand the value of kind of getting you out of the way so others can come in, but I also don't want to, I guess I'd be concerned about making that the goal because I think there is some value in the 4-year experience, and believe me, and the way it stands now, most are going 4 to 5 years.
And if I can say something in reference to that value to 4 years, a lot of people aren't hiring you if you don't have experience. And so internships while you're in college is extremely important. And that's why if we are going to make more students do summer courses, I think it's important to integrate the online learning because then I can move to Wisconsin or maybe Orlando, do my internship, still maybe be able to take 6 hours online at the same time to kind of carry out that experience. Because when you come out at 21 years old, they're like, what experience do you have? You say, well, I went to school for 4 years. I don't have any. Well, sorry, we can't do anything with you. So you have to still make sure we're paying attention to the experience portion when we're trying to put people out in the workforce.
There are now students that graduate in 3 years because they go to college with already in high school a bunch of credits going to the college.
And I agree with that. And I guess like when my own family member was faced with that choice because she did basically her senior year in college, I said slow down. I mean because you need to have that internship or have something that you can say more than I graduated in 3 years and here I am giving me a job. So I guess I certainly know you're right. I mean, particularly with the models that we're setting up with students going to college and high school at the same time, some can graduate earlier. I guess I would just I'd be somewhat concerned about pushing that as the standard or the goal. And I certainly think that my presidents I would like the presidents to weigh in on that idea because certainly they're more experienced and I would be offering this comments on the issue, but I would think that encouraging the full 4-year experience that we're going to produce better qualified, full-rounded individuals who are more ready for the workforce. And I could be wrong. I don't know if Dr. Rosenberg or Dr. Barron or Dr. Ammons, if you guys can, Dr. Saunders, any thoughts you have on the issue?
I'd be very interested to hear from the presidents. Yeah. What do they think?
I think there are multiple pathways for students, and that's what we have to keep remembering here, that the majority of the students won't be finishing in 3 years. I think the motivated student who's going on to medical school, graduate school, that's really a strong motivation to finish your undergraduate when you know your entire educational career is much lengthier. I also know that for parents with students going to more expensive private schools, the finishing in 3 years and saving a year's tuition with AP credits and things like that is very attractive, especially if they're going to go on and pay for medical school or law school. But I think there's multiple tracks for students, and I think there are students today who definitely have accelerated programs We run at FAU one of those dual high school college programs, and we're always graduating from college at graduation, you know, a couple of 17-year-olds, sometimes even a 16-year-old. So there are many pathways, but I don't believe that acceleration is going to be a generalized model. That's the European system. Remember, for years, Europe, especially England, college was 3 years.
Right.
When they come over to our graduate schools, they have to do that year post-baccalaureate to then get into our graduate schools. I think some compressed degrees like a 5-year bachelor's, master's is a very attractive thing for students to come in, for parents also, where you know if you stay the 5th year and go to some summers, you can get a master's in, say, one of the engineering disciplines, some of the sciences. I think that's been a national trend, too, to have students look at a 5-year program and get a master's degree instead of 6 years. So the 4 plus 1 plus 1.5. So unfortunately, I think we see in a lot of disciplines an extension of the amount of education required for licensure or work, especially in the healthcare field. When I went to college, physical therapy was an undergraduate degree. It's now a doctorate. Audiology, to be an audiologist, is now a doctorate. Occupational therapy is now a doctorate. Of course, pharmacy is now a doctorate. So, yeah, 6-year doctorate program.
If you want to get a CPA, you have to have experience. But if you go for the 5th year, get master's, that counts towards your experience, and you can take the test immediately.
So I think both the licensure groups, changing the standards for the amount of education needed in different fields, the multiple entry points for people, I think it's just going to be an enormous mix. But layering on the expectation of 3 years for most of our students, I think, is not going to happen.
Dr. Barron, you have a comment?
Well, I mean, it's important for a student to go at the pace that is appropriate. We're about to have a celebration for students who finish. This is an opportunity for students to bring a lot of credits to the table, or are particularly aggressive at taking credits. But I think we also have 2 topics in here. One is how fast you can go, and the other is making sure people don't fall off the track and waste time while they're getting their degree. So if you look at it, a big portion of this is your first-year retention. To lose students in the first year, to have them drop out, to have them do something else, to come back, this contributes to a number so that isn't this number of whether or not you can move somebody through very quickly. It's they've slipped off course, made mistakes. So, for instance, you make a map for a particular major, a student falls off the map, it sends up a red flag. You need to talk to that student what's going on, because it just costs somebody, even though our tuition is very low, it just costs somebody 2 extra semesters. Okay? We've discovered that in an investment in mentoring, and you see this in coaching and tutoring, and you can see this in national statistics, Florida State has moved its first-year retention from being in the 70s into the 90s. Now, you're going to see a dramatic change in our graduation rate as a result of that particular change. So this is an investment that I think saves the state a considerable amount of money, because you're not having that student come in for a year and have nothing come of it, or have it take 6 years to do it. And it allows your throughput in the system in getting degrees graduated to be much higher. So this is an effective use of university resources. So I just want to make sure that in thinking about how fast we're going, we're not just thinking about can we put that student through the hole really quickly. We're also thinking about making sure that they have the right opportunity, so that we're not wasting that time that's in college, or making them have to start over something or fall off a map because they happen to miss this prerequisite and they can't go to C because they haven't done B. And so, I mean, and these involve 2 very different strategies, so I just want to make sure they were both on the table.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Governor Tripp first. He had his hand up. Governor Tripp.
I'm kind of going to go a little bit different topic. I could bring it out very quickly. That is that if I believe, and I do believe what he said, is we're bringing high school students out better prepared and further up the road, and if I believe what conversation seems to be, that we are going to funnel better and brighter students in the state college system, and we're going to load that up somewhat, and if I believe what we all say is still one of the greatest assets of the state of Florida, and that's 2 + 2, then what I believe the university system should be thinking about is, how are you going to take more juniors and seniors? Because I believe that those students who come out of high school and maybe can't move away but are bright and go into the college system and get that associate degree, they're going to want to have maybe their degree from UCF, from FSU, and they're not going to want to stay fully in the state college system at that junior and senior level. They're going to want to move out. And I don't see anything that we've been talking about that tells us that we're still committed to taking all of the people where we're increasing their ability to go to a university. So I think that has to be part of our conversation, and we have to recognize that. I would hate to have these people come with the expectation that, okay, I did my first 2 years, I got my degree, I now have everything, and I want to be at FSU, I want to be at UCF, I want to be at the University of Florida, and now we're saying, well, you know, the junior and senior classes are full. So I hope that becomes part of our dialogue, because it's what we are telling our students. Come, you know, the more prepared you can get, the better opportunity you'll have to be in a university.
Okay, President Delaney.
Yeah, I thought Dottie assembled some great data that's certainly worth sort of chewing on. As to the processing through more quickly, I think we've always got to be mindful of the words that Tika came up, that, you know, quality has got to be, I know today we're on the macro numbers, but at Florida and Florida State, I think 90% of the students are going full-time, and we tend to envision the system as being the classic 18-year-old leaving high school 3 months earlier and going off to college. But for the other 9 universities, the last times I looked at the data, the schools really range from 50 to about 75% full-time. And it's going to be very difficult if you're going part-time or if you're working full-time and trying to go to graduate in the time frame that we're taking a look at. The other thing that really struck me, and I think I caught this right, but to hit the numbers that Dottie was projecting, we'd need about another 200,000 students in the system in 15 years. That's a real jump. I mean, that's a real lift. It'd be as if every one of the 10 universities, setting aside New College, would need to have 20,000 students. When we were putting together the new Florida initiative, so I've been able to flip these numbers back in my head, we were talking about doubling the budgets for the SUS, and that would generate about 50,000 more degrees a year. So the other item we, of course, haven't talked about is where's the money going to come from? You know, because we're talking about some really expensive steps to go through. But I think it's a great set of data to work from, and commend the staff for putting it together.
Very good. Okay, Governor Beard.
Yeah, we're on the same plane here. I mean, it looks to me like we, at the low end, are going to increase the number of students by 50%. On the high end, it's doubling it in the next the time frame that we're talking about here, and resources are going to be a big piece, particularly where we are today. There are no resources. So how do we get there, and what does it take? What does it take to meet the goals? And then we can give ourselves a grading system and go to the legislature and say, okay, we've got to have the resources to meet these goals. If you buy into these goals, and for our own grading system, we need to figure all that out. But anyway, figuring out the resources are the most important piece of my puzzle.
Yeah, I think this is all good, and Dottie, you talked about it going in, but I think we got to start at the top here. I think Florida is kind of on a bell curve. We all know what that means in higher education. I mean, if you take the last 10 years, the last 20 years, and then you start making out trend lines in a state right now that's not growing. And in fact, I know in some cases, and maybe more cases than that, the high school populations are shrinking. So I think we got to be very realistic. This state is maturing, and I think we got to be very realistic about our population growth things. And then all this other information has to fit under that. And it's all good data. I mean, it's really interesting data, and then all the change in the programs. But I think we really got to decide how fast we're going to grow, if at all.
Yeah, when we look at all this degree production, do we do any like meta-analysis with maybe the need of industries that might be in Florida or maybe possibly coming to Florida? They kind of help us, I guess, extrapolate out what type of degrees we might be wanting to promote. Another reason I ask that, because I've heard the Chancellor a couple of times talk about one of our biggest exports being, I guess, intellectual capital and students going from out of the state. So I guess that would be a good question where if we're trying to attract industries or maybe even develop a workforce that can be successful here in Florida, you know, what does that look like, or maybe what industries would be trying to prepare our students to be able to go and work in?
Thanks, Chairman. That's a great question, and it's one that the Higher Education Coordinating Council is tackling right now. More than just a numbers game, and we've seen some great numbers here, which obviously give us an awful lot to chew on in terms of how you prepare for the behemoth that is coming. Is how you organize yourself. And we're looking at several things with the Higher Ed Coordinating Council. And one of them, Governor, is just that. We know when we get, especially to the baccalaureate, master's, and PhD program, that we're actually educating people to be able to go anywhere in the world to work with that bachelor's, that master's, and that PhD. Now, having said that, we also know we have an obligation to Florida to make sure that we're creating an economic base in Florida and producing a talent supply chain that will fuel that economic development base. So we're looking at clusters, what I call them the 3 E's. The existing industries in Florida, and a great example of that is space and aerospace. It's been around for 50 years, and it has the potential to remain a great industry and even grow if we do the right things. And a part of that is, are we creating a talent supply chain that can help fuel that industry, which has been around for a long time? If we lose space and aerospace, it would be a terrible blow to the Sunshine State. So therefore, we need to make sure that we're organizing ourselves in a way to help produce students at all levels, starting all the way back pre-K through 12, who can go to work in that industry. The second E, or what I call those that are evolving. In other words, they're here, but they've got a lot of growth potential ahead of them. Biotech is a perfect illustration of that. We all of a sudden think biotech's been around forever. Well, it's been around for a while, but I think we could still all agree it's in its early stages. So therefore, that cluster industry, are we creating a talent supply chain of students at all levels who will be able to stay in Florida and help grow the biotech industry in Florida? And then the third E are the emerging industries. What are the ones that we don't even have yet in Florida, either long-term or even short-term, that are out there on the horizon that we need to start looking at now as attractive industries for the state of Florida? One may be, for example, alternative energy. And while we're in the business of alternative energy, I think we pretty much agree we're scratching the surface. Alternative energy has the potential to be a gigantic industry, not only finding ways to power the future, but creating whole industries around them. So yes, the Higher Ed Coordinating Council right now is taking on that challenge to not just look at how many baccalaureates, how many masters, how many PhDs, but also how we can produce that talent supply chain to really see our economic development portfolio broaden in the Sunshine State, but also remember we are preparing students to take those degrees anywhere in the world and put them to work at the end of the day. It's a great question.
Governor Edwards.
Following up a bit on Governor Temple's comment, a number of years back we did, I thought, a great master plan. Covered the next 10 years in the system. The one thing we didn't put in that was cost. And I think that it's important when we look at the projections that somehow we put some cost figures, because we can't add all the production we're talking about adding with the same dollars that we have today, which I'm not sure how you incorporate this, Governor Martin, in this plan. Maybe it could be as an addendum. If we do this, it's going to cost this much. But I think it's important that we recognize and clearly announce to the whole state and the legislature that it's going to cost money. And with that thought in mind, I'm not trying to push my gambling concept more than I should here today. But the truth is, we also need to look for some additional sources of revenue. And I think it's clear from all that I hear that we're not going to have major tax increases. Without major tax increases, unless we go out and discover 5,000 oil wells on one of our campuses, we got a problem. And somehow somebody needs to be looking ahead for some additional sources of revenue. And as Governor Frost and I were talking about, going back to the gambling thing briefly, both of us have contributed, I think, every time there's been a statewide referendum to defeat it. But times change. And it's here. We have it. There's a tremendous potential and income there. And if it was done and controlled clearly by the state with a dedicated recipient of those funds, and it might be Medicare or Medicaid. And if that's the case, that still helps us because that frees that much more general revenue dollars to go into higher education. But my comment to conclude it would be, one, somehow I really think we need to build a little bit of cost factor into this, and also need to take a long look ahead at some projected potential other revenue source.
Okay, it's right at almost 2:30. I want to try to wrap this up. President Rosenberg, you have a comment?
I just wanted to say, I think this is we're on the right track. Several years ago, this board did identify a set of numbers where the state should be in 20 to 25 years in terms of the numbers of individuals with bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees. And it strikes me that what's lacking in the conversation about what we're up to is that we should have a consensus about where we would like to be with perhaps three options. The strategy determines the allocation of resources in part, and we're certainly closer to that than we were several years ago. So it strikes me, unless we can determine what we would like the demographic composition in terms of degrees to be of our population 5, 10, 20 years from now, then it's going to be very difficult to determine what exactly should be the output and what should be the balance between full and part-time students who graduate in 4 years and students who graduate in 6 years. And I think that the board has the opportunity now, which probably wasn't the case 3 or 4 years ago, to lead that conversation, and to do that perhaps through the Higher Education Policy Coordinating Committee. But my instinct is that until we know where we want to go, it's going to be very difficult to get any place. And it's not clear to me that we know where we want to go in terms of that broader vision for Florida's population in terms of its educational levels. We're starting to get a feel for what that pipeline looks like, and it's very progressive in terms of K through 12. But we still probably should have 3 or 4 scenarios for 2020, 2025, present those to our partners in the legislature. Say, okay, here's what it looks like over the next 15 years, and here's the approximate cost. I think until we do that, it's going to be very difficult to come up with a prudent and appropriate strategy.
Thank you. Right, Dr. Hent.
I would agree with what President Rosenberg just said. I would add that it would be really important as well to be sure we know where we are, not just where we want to go. For instance, it's a reporting convention that we list 4-year and 6-year graduation rates. Just because someone doesn't graduate in 4 years doesn't mean it takes them 6 years. It's more likely to be 4.5. So if you start planning as though you've got 4 and 6 years, you're going to make some assumptions that aren't really great. Furthermore, it would be nice to find a way to get kids through, people of all ages, through a 4-year degree faster, but don't assume that if you're going to teach the same number of classes, we have the capacity right now to add a whole lot to the load. I was always kind of amazed when we would talk about forcing the course load up from 4 courses to 5 on average. We all want a 5-course load, because a number of us have figured out that 8 times 15 is 120. So we kind of like a 4-course load per semester for getting people through in 4 years. But I'll tell you that if we suddenly had all of our students want to take a 5-course load, we could not accommodate them. So there is a lot. There are a lot of little nuances to this that we really need to get on top of as we go forward with our plan.
I think it's been excellent discussion. Governor Rude, you have a comment?
Well, just I wanted to add a few things. There's a couple of great plans out there, and I don't know if you were all provided with information on those, but if you weren't, I think we should get that to you. In particular, it's Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, and Arizona. The Arizona one is great. And the reason I mention this is it's kind of nice to know the type of document, even though what we say and maybe and how we structure it might be different. It's kind of nice to know where we're going. And to me, what I hope this plan enables us to do is when we meet with the governor or the speaker or the Senate president, we can sit down and we can show them that we have a crisis looming, potential crisis looming. I don't know if it's a crisis yet, but if some of the data that we see is true, if we don't act now, there's no way we're going to meet our share of the demand for the degrees that we need to be competitive in the United States and in the world. And that's what I think this illustrates. And not only the demand, which I refer to as the pipeline, that Dean talked about today, that we can adjust every year to see how those numbers are changing year to year. But it also deals with the things, the excellence factor, and how well do we want to compete in the market, and what kind of quality do we want to generate. So, I'm excited about this project. We've got a lot of work to do, but the thing that struck me when I first saw this is that we really need to get it done, because if you look at the next 2 years, we're flat. We've been flat for a while. Even at the low estimates, I don't know how we're going to achieve them. And we've got to get busy convincing others that if we want to be competitive as a state, we've got to start investing money in higher education. So, thanks.
Mr. Smith.
My last meeting, I better say it if I said. One, they are coming at you. So they're just coming at you. They're 15,000, 3 or above in AP. What university will they go into is the question. Who has a seat for them? The other is that our state college system is way beyond capacity. And they have been a lot of the shock absorber with adults going back in the changing economy. So if those doors begin to close, there's more coming at you. And the universities can't respond. I wouldn't necessarily define it a crisis, but you've got a moment in Florida's history that is either going to get addressed, and that capacity for gross domestic product and so forth moves up, or we stay flat-footed and where we are and let the rest of the nation pass us by. So.
Very good. I'll take that as a closing comment, but I think we've had a great dialogue today. Laying the foundation for this very, very critical discussion that we'll have to develop this plan. And I'll get with staff and the chair. So what I would like to do, Madam Chair, is to maybe have a strategic planning work session for the next month for the committee to sit down and take all the comments that we've heard today and to develop an outline, a strategy going forward. But this is probably the most strategic, I think, conversation we've had about planning the state system since I've been on the board. I'm very, encouraged in terms of what we will come out as an end product.
Thank you very much, Governor Martin, for your leadership on this issue, and I certainly encourage yourself and Governor Root, if you guys can come up with the time. I think that it will be necessary for your committee to do some work in between the time that we come back together as a full board. For calendaring purposes, keep in mind that our next meeting is via conference call on May the 5th. Our next in-person meeting is June 22nd and 23rd at the University of South Florida in Tampa. Again, we got a lot more session to go, so I'm asking if you find time to come and spend some more time in Tallahassee, we really, really would appreciate it. With that, unless there is any objection, the meeting is adjourned. And let's see, how do we make it? It is now 2:34. All right.